Thank you so much, Hannah. And I must say, I was truly amazed that it's been now a year that I've been speaking to Hannah off and on. I think she'll be happy the program is finished. She won't have to speak to me that much, but I'm truly grateful to the Orthodox Union for really being willing to embrace this program. As I think may be touched upon later in the program, a lot of the issues here concern shame, what may be hidden or not, and I commend the OU for really tackling this issue and making it a priority. And I also want to say that early on in the process, I learned that if Hannah recommended something for the program and I thought something different, I should just listen to Hannah. And I'll just give one example. Right at the outset, when we started talking about it, she said, well, what should we call this program? What title do you have in mind? And I said, I have no idea. I didn't know we needed a title. And then I came up with something, and I think you told me in a nice way that that sounded pretty lame. And you suggested, why don't we call it, everyone knows somebody, eating disorder in the Jewish community. Everyone knows. So I thought, well, I don't know, that's okay. Everyone knows somebody. That sounded a little lame to me. But we went with it, and you know what? I realized how perceptive she was. Because I can't tell you how many conversations I've had where people have asked me about the program, and the first thing they say is, you know what, I know somebody, the daughter of my friends, a friend of mine, a cousin of mine, everybody's come up and said, I know somebody, so I guess you knew that before I did. I'm also very grateful that this program is sort of a combined effort of this Jewish community and secular community, and they've come together to create this program because obviously there are issues involving both. And we have a number of organizations, and it's probably going to take up about all my time to thank them all, but let me give it a try because they've really all been very helpful and supportive. In addition to the OU, the main sponsors are the Eating Disorder Network of Maryland. I happen to be on the board, and some of my colleagues and friends are here from the board, along with the National Eating Disorder Association, of course, Congregation Beth Shalom. Just briefly, the Eating Disorder Network of Maryland is a nonprofit organization that really tries to provide objective, if that's possible, information on eating disorders, treatment providers, and available resources throughout the state and the Washington, D.C. area. And some of the board members that are in the audience, if I can just ask them to stand, if I could recognize them. Sharon Peterson is the founding director and CEO. Rick Deese is the president, and Rick and I are happily the two fathers on the board when they started to let men in. Carolyn LeBrie. And I'm looking around to see if there's anybody else on the board, and I don't think so. But we are operating on Jewish time, so our other sponsors, we have 3 shuls in this neighborhood. Every one of them agreed to sponsor. Chabad of Potomac. I'm particularly grateful to Rabbi Blooming, who is here. Very grateful to you for your sponsorship and supporting and promoting the program, as well as the Young Israel of Potomac, Congregation of Shalom, Kent Mill Synagogue, Charles E. Smith Jewish Day School, which my daughter graduated from, the Melvin Berman Hebrew Academy, the Renfrew Center, the Center for Recovery, the Atlantic Seaboard Chapter of NCSY, and the Jewish Coalition Against Domestic Abuse. And last but by no means least, I want to thank my wife Ellen, otherwise stepmother extraordinaire, to Amy, and my son Alex, and with me, Ellen was there every step of the way in her upbringing and through this struggle that we had. So very briefly, and I'm just going to take about 5 minutes to give my 2 cents, and I'll leave it to the experts to correct all of my errors. I just want to tell you a little bit about Amy and why we're doing this program. As some of you know, Amy died 7 years ago after struggling for many years from an eating disorder. She was a very compassionate and caring young woman. When she died, she donated her organs, and which literally saved the lives of several people. And although she ultimately succumbed to this condition, she helped others who were in similar straits and seemed to have this unique capacity to listen and empathize with others. And we've been told by others that, using her example, what she experienced both with her struggles and with her death, they committed themselves to improve their own health. So it's in that spirit and in her memory and honor that we wanted to shine a light on what's truly a very complicated condition affecting the Jewish community and every demographic group. And I say to shine a light because, as I see it, fundamental problem in addressing eating disorders is that they are so misunderstood. There are so many misconceptions about them that it's quite remarkable. To date myself, some 40 years ago in my first year of college, I took a basic psychology course. I think there was about 15 minutes devoted to eating disorders as one of the mental health conditions. I probably don't remember too well what has happened in 40 years, but sort of my recollection is it was described as a condition primarily affecting upper middle-class Jews, and the teacher put up a photo of a teenage girl looking like she had just come out of a concentration camp. That was about all that was said. As you all know, there are all other types of eating disorders other than just anorexia, but I found that to be mystifying. It didn't make any sense. The takeaway message seemed to be that this is a condition of spoiled Jewish girls, to put it brutally, who have nothing better to do and are just looking to get attention one way or another. Fast forward years later, primarily when Amy was in high school, not having thought about that college course for a long time, suddenly Ellen and I, we had a sort of on-the-job training on eating disorders. And there were just so many misconceptions, and let me just name a few, and then I'll turn to the experts. Misconception number one, it's not about the food. As I came to understand it, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, certainly from what we saw and what we understand, is that what you see in the symptoms, the dieting, the binge eating, the purging, are typically means of covering up or dealing with some type of deep pain that can stem from a variety of sources. It could be a question of abuse, be it sexual, physical, or emotional, bullying, trauma of one sort or another, depression. So telling somebody, why don't you go eat or stop eating, is not the answer. Lesson number two, it's not a lifestyle choice. It's not a fad or a phase. It's more like an addiction. It's a life-threatening condition, as we have shown. Extensive malnutrition, for one thing, often leads to heart failure. It can starve heart organs until they eventually fail. Bulimia can also lead to heart failure, rupturing of intestinal areas. And in the case of anorexia, 1 in 5 deaths from the condition result from suicide. And eating disorders, compared to other conditions, are by far the most lethal. Lesson 3 of our quick on-the-job training was what to do. You're faced with a bewildering array of questions on how to treat it, and often the usual healthcare providers or rabbis that you may turn to don't really have the answers. Owing to the work, mainly of NIH, there's been great advances in the past 40 years. A lot of advances in the last 7 years since Amy died, but certainly there's a lot more that needs to be done as to the causes and treatment. We're in a synagogue here, so is this a Jewish problem? Is food, not to mention fast days, laws of kashrut, other rituals, too much of a preoccupation in Jewish culture? Is there a genetic disposition? I don't really know the answers, and maybe we'll hear more about that later. There is evidence, and again, none of this is proven, I don't believe, that Jews do experience eating disorders at a high rate, and that it is a growing problem, especially in the Orthodox community. And when I Googled it last night, I found a recent Jerusalem Post article that reported that Israel has the highest rate of anorexia, bulimia, and binge eating in the world. And it's across the religious spectrum, from the most secular to the most orthodox. The fact is that eating disorders don't respect any boundaries between different demographic groups. It is found to a greater or lesser extent all over the world. And I don't know that we really need to figure out whether it's more or less of a Jewish problem than in other groups. It's a problem. It's a problem in the Jewish community, it's a problem in all communities, and it's a growing problem. And my hope is that a program like this might help to focus the attention on being willing to, quote unquote, come out of the closet on this issue, which I commend the OU for doing, and to look and see whether there are teachings and cultural aspects of Judaism that could be used as part of the healing process. So with that, at this time I want to introduce Rabbi Beth Shalom, Rabbi Nissen Antin. First of all, I want to personally thank you and both Rebbe and Sarah for being so supportive over the years with our grief and everything else. And I don't know if you remember, but when I first approached you about doing this program, which is a long time ago, I think I asked you, do you think it would be appropriate to do this sort of program? I really haven't seen where we did anything like that before, and I remember your words. They stuck with me. You said it's not only appropriate that we do it, but this is a program that we must do. So with that, I'd like to introduce the Rabbi of Beth Shalom, Rabbi Nissen Antin.
So Elliot spoke a little bit about Amy, and I want to speak a little bit about Elliot, just for a minute, and then I want to offer a prayer. Since Amy's death in 2007, Elliot has really been a presence in this room, really. This is our daily minyan room, and Elliot has been here more than he probably planned on being here. Not only with Amy's death was he here to say Kaddish, but then in 2009, when first your father passed away, and then while you were saying Kaddish for your father, which is an 11-month period, during that time period, your mother also passed away. So definitely you and your family were not strangers to the grief process. And you came, and I every time I would look at you, I would see this, what I would call a quiet sense of courage and strength. And I think everybody else in our minyan felt it and was inspired by it and learned from it. And we were so happy to have you with us, and I hope that we provided some comfort and support for you as well during that time period. And just seeing all the organizations that have co-sponsored this, and the way that you've taken your grief and really used it for good with your volunteer work around eating disorders. And as it says, everybody knows somebody, and therefore you're able to mobilize us to try to do whatever we can do. So we really are very grateful for all of that, and grateful to all the other co-sponsors for sponsoring. We're going to hear from the experts on how to actually, hopefully, address the problem and be present for people who are suffering with eating disorders. But I do want to open our program with a prayer. In our Jewish tradition, we have a beautiful prayer, the Misha Berach, for people who are ill. And there's one line in the Misha Berach, which I think will specifically speak to this morning what we're talking about. We ask God to heal those who are sick with a refuas hanefesh or refuas haguf. Refuas haguf, the second line, means healing of the body. That would be understood to say, but we also ask God to heal us with refuas hanefesh, which is healing of the spirit, healing of the soul, and we know the connection, especially around eating disorders. And so I'll translate it into English. I know not everyone knows the prayer in Hebrew, but I'd like to open with the prayer, with the traditional Misha Berach. So if you can, please rise for this prayer. Misha Berach Avotenu Avraham Yitzchak v'Yaakov Moshe Aaron David Shlomo V'Imotenu Sarah Rivka Rachel v'Leah U'Yivarech V'Rapeh Et HaCholim V'Et HaGvulot Ba'avur She'Nitain Tzedakah Ba'Avraham Yischarzeh HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yimalei Rachamim Aleihem L'Achlimon L'Rapotam L'Achzikam L'Achyotam Yishlach Lahem Mehera Refuah Shalema Min HaShemayim L'Chol Ivarei L'Chol Gideon B'Toch Shar Cholei Yisrael refuat hanefesh, refuat haguf. Hashta ba'agala ubizman kariv v'nomar Amen. May the one who blessed our forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Moses, Aaron, David, and Shlomo, and our foremothers, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. May God bless and heal all those who are sick. May we contribute charity on their behalf. And in reward for this, may the Holy One, blessed be He, be filled with compassion for them, to restore them to health, to heal them, to strengthen them, and to revive them. May God send them speedily a complete recovery from heaven for all of their vessels, for all of their limbs, among the sick people of Israel and the entire world. A recovery of the body and a recovery of the spirit, swiftly and soon. V'nomar Amen, and let us say Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
It was inevitable that I would forget something in my opening remarks, so let me just return and do something. And that is, I wanted to just introduce the board members who are here. Nancy, did you stand earlier? Okay, I was just looking around to see if there's anybody else here. I think we're covered, okay. At this time, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Insel. Dr. Thomas Insel has been the director of the National Institutes of Mental Health, which is the lead institute at NIH that funds research on mental disorders, including eating disorders. During his tenure, he has focused on the genetics and neurobiology of mental disorders and transforming approaches to diagnosis and treatment. He previously was a professor of psychiatry at Emory University. And just as an aside, I want to mention I saw Dr. Insel speak some time ago at a NEDA conference. And while I saw him speak, I was thinking, I'm going to ask him if he will speak at this conference. So there was a reception afterwards, and I made a beeline up to him. I think I probably interrupted whoever was talking to. I asked you if you would consider talking at a program like this, and he said yes. So with that, there's more information on his biography in the flyers that you have. But I'm happy to introduce Dr. Insel.
Well, thank you very much, Elliot. It's actually a real pleasure and honor to be here. And thanks also to Hannah and others who have been involved with hosting this event. Given the title, Everybody Knows Somebody, I think there's every reason for us to come together to talk about this, because, well, everybody knows somebody. Often we don't know that, and it's remarkable how little we talk about an issue that people really have deep feelings about, often feelings of shame and feelings that they do not want to share. So it's important to create that fora for that to happen and to be able to out the issues that are important around this very serious medical problem. I come to you I'm not sure I'm an expert. In fact, I tend to think that the families who struggle with this become the kind of involuntary experts that we all learn from. But my role is as director of the institute at the NIH that oversees research on eating disorders and mental disorders broadly. I also had a chance to learn something about the problems of anorexia and bulimia as a psychiatrist in practice, or psychiatrist in an academic department for some years in San Francisco. But probably most of all, I come also as a parent who, as you'll hear in a few minutes, had a daughter that developed a very serious eating disorder, who fortunately survived and will be telling us about that experience. And I was clueless. Just remarkable for someone who was in a position of leadership for the nation in terms of mental illness, to have this happen and absolutely not be able to see it in my own family and not know what to do. So believe me, expertise really does belong to families and not to any of us who may have degrees or may have important licensing authority. It's really, it comes down to what people's lived experience happens to be, and no one that goes looking for this. You do become an expert in the most involuntary way. So what I thought I would do, partly to introduce the topic, is just to provide sort of a context and to think about what we do know and how we currently view this. So I'll be sort of the fact person here a little bit and give you a bit of background on eating disorders broadly. There really are three versions that we now think about in the diagnostic sense. The one that probably people know the most about, anorexia nervosa, is not the most common, but probably the most serious. Anorexia, term we use in cancer as well as in psychiatry, means literally out, and anorexia, which is hunger or drive. So without hunger, without drive. It's about, generally about defined by having a low body weight and an intense fear of gaining weight and a disturbed body image. But as Elliot said, this is not about food. It's about something much more complex. Most people with anorexia do an intense amount of restricting. There's often intense exercise to keep body weight down. They may purge. They may do binge eating and then purge. This is, again, as Elliot mentioned, an extraordinarily serious problem. A mortality rate of 5% per decade, which makes it the most fatal of all mental disorders. More fatal than depression, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, autism, go across the board. This is the one that kills people, often through suicide. Suicide rate here is about 50 to 60-fold greater than in the general population. So it's just really extraordinarily serious. And it's, as with many mental disorders, it comes on early. It's probably maybe the third, it's hard to put numbers on this, but probably the third most common disorder of adolescence. At which point it's more common in girls versus boys, but it's not restricted to girls, as we'll talk about in a few minutes. Our best estimate are something like 14 million people affected. So that while we say it's not common, it's certainly not rare. And given the mortality, it's incredibly serious. So that's anorexia. The second version is bulimia, or sometimes called bulimia nervosa. Again, bu is from the Greek for ox, or more broadly, ravenous is often the word that goes with it. And limia from limos, which means, in this case, hunger. So it's sort of ravenous hunger or ox hunger, if you like. And this is about, so bulimia is about binge eating and mostly about the loss of control. It's a very compulsive kind of behavior. And it's unique in that it's not only about compulsively eating, but there are what are called compensatory behaviors that go with that. Those are most often vomiting. Sometimes it's the excessive use of laxatives. Sometimes it's just as with anorexia, there's just intense exercise. The people who do diagnostics like to put numbers on things, so they would say that since this is episodic, it has to happen at least one time a week for about 3 months. And the other thing about this piece of eating disorder spectrum is that people with bulimia, and to some extent with anorexia, have a self-evaluation which is almost entirely based on their body weight, body shape. So it's very much preoccupation, truly an obsession for both anorexia and bulimia. Third version is binge eating disorder. And again, these are not God-given categories. These are categories that some psychiatrists have come up with by trying to observe what they see and trying to figure out what clusters together. And it keeps changing, and it may very well be different in a few years. But binge eating disorder is very much like bulimia. You get the binge eating again, and it's also recurrent and out of control. But unlike bulimia, there's not the compensatory behaviors. So this is a kind of emergent diagnosis that people are using because they were surprised by the number of people that they saw in practice who were actually binge eating without purging, without or without vomiting, without the intensive exercise. Again, there's usually marked distress with this and this enormous preoccupation. Binge eating disorder patients tend to be obese, although not always, and certainly not everybody with obesity would fit into this category. And then there's a sort of fourth category that is now recognized, which is really kind of variations on all of the above. It's important to know that often people who meet the criteria for anorexia nervosa today will have aspects of bulimia and may meet the criteria for bulimia either today or within a few months, and back and forth. And these disorders don't, and again, they're not categorical in the sense that they represent necessarily valid, distinct entities the way you would say in other areas of medicine where you have biomarkers that really provide an important validating aspect of how we do diagnosis. People, when we talk about this, almost always ask, so what causes this? How do people end up in this problem that Elliot introduced that already? It is this odd mix, as many mental disorders are, of genes that make people vulnerable and experience. We sometimes say that genes load the gun and experience pulls the trigger. It's a little bit of a violent metaphor for what I think is probably best understood through compassion and not military metaphors. But let me clarify that there is probably, almost certainly, particularly for anorexia, a genetic aspect that has to do not so much with the behavior specifically of restricting or following calories or getting obsessed with weight and body shape, but something that's far more trait-like, much more about temperament, that has to do with the temperament for perfectionism, often for a sense of low self-esteem, sometimes for actually enormous compassion and enormous interest in others, and you heard that a little bit with Amy. There's that actually, if there's a genetic component to this, my guess is that a lot of it follows that way. We've often wondered whether there are what we would call genetic isolates or particular populations, whether that would be within, it would follow, for instance, within a specific Jewish population, Ashkenazi. Ashkenazi have lots of genetic disorders that are rare and yet unique, that you can be traced back a couple of centuries. This one doesn't seem to show that, although we don't know enough yet. I must say that one of the aspects of the environment that I thought was sort of telling when I went to China a few years back to meet with leaders in the mental health research community there, kind of the analog for the head of NIMH there, and I was asking him about autism and schizophrenia. All he wanted to talk about was anorexia. And the reason for that, from his perspective, was that before 2000 they had never heard of it, never seen it. But if any of you have been to China, you'll know this is the most fashion-conscious, consumer-driven culture on the planet. It boggles the mind. And you see these images everywhere in Shanghai and Beijing of these razor-thin young women that everybody's supposedly using as a role model. And by 2009, 2010, when I was having this conversation, this had become, from their perspective, an epidemic amongst Chinese adolescent girls. So no question that there is some aspects of the environment that really drive this. Increasingly, we think about these disorders much in the way we think about addiction, also with addictive disorders, that combination of genes and environments. And that may be particularly telling here because there are aspects of this, as bizarre as this may seem to some of you, there are aspects that are really self-reinforcing and which make this a particularly difficult problem to solve. And one of the reasons why often when we think about treatments, we think about treating anorexia, for instance, not so differently than the way we think about treating cocaine addiction, which has some of the same features, although maybe that is really surprising. I wanted to take a few minutes to actually follow Elliot's lead, just to say it is worth sort of dispelling some of the myths here, because we all have concepts about this, and I'm sure that any of you who came to this session today on this beautiful Sunday morning came here because you have a personal interest or a personal need in this topic, which means you know something about it. And what's so striking to me as a scientist is how there are so many myths that we need to dispel. And I wanted to take just maybe 5 minutes to run through them. And some of these you've already heard from Elliot. I guess the first one would be to say that you can know who has an eating disorder by looking at them. And that just is not the case. That image of someone who's just walked out of a concentration camp or someone who's morbidly obese, well, that may capture some fraction of people who have part of this spectrum in all shapes and all sizes who would meet the criteria and are really suffering with this problem. As Elliot said, this is not just about food, or even actually just about body image. There are many, many issues that have to do with self-discipline, with self-image, with how people define who they are, that get tied up here, and really make this much more complicated than the ostensible symptoms that we're often using to make the diagnosis. The second myth is that this is about white upper middle class girls. And there is that tradition, and certainly the story I just told you from China suggests that that is a piece of what we see with anorexia nervosa or bulimia. Fact is, though, that increasingly we see men who meet the criteria for all of these disorders. This is an incredibly diverse population. It doesn't, as far as we can tell, restrict to any particular racial or ethnic group. In fact, maybe the way to turn that around is to say that, unfortunately, no racial or ethnic group is protected. There are increasingly, recently, and I'm not sure I know why this is, we're seeing more middle-aged women who may have had an eating disorder in their teens and 20s who are now coming back around menopause with many of the same features that they haven't struggled with for 2 or 3 decades. I don't remember that from the years that I saw patients, but I'm hearing this from the experts in the field, that increasingly this is an issue, often women coming with their daughters and dealing with some of the same issues in both generations. Well, that sets up the third myth, which is that that families are to blame, or sometimes we say mothers are to blame. On Yom Kippur this year, I wrote a blog which got a lot of attention called Atonement, and the thesis of that was that when I first came to NIMH now 12 years ago, I met with many the people in the advocacy community, and I asked the people from the National Alliance for the Mentally Ill how I could be helpful to them, and they, without missing a beat, one of the board members said, "You should declare a day of atonement for all the things that psychiatry has done wrong." I was a little taken off guard. I actually didn't have a response, but I just saw her about 2 months ago for the annual NAMI meeting here in Washington, and I hadn't seen her since, so I went up to her and said, that was just the most amazing meeting, I remember that. And I said, I'm sorry that I didn't know what to say when you made that suggestion. And she said, again without missing a beat, "I'm sorry that I didn't ask for a week." A week of atonement. So what that's about is the sense from so many people, and I happen to be one of them, that we have this very unfortunate legacy of blame and shame that goes back really a century in this field. And it goes back almost that long for eating disorders, where the traditional approach when I was being trained was to say parents are the problem, and you do what in medicine was called a parentectomy. You take the child, the 14-year-old, and you remove her from the family, and you spend weeks, months, whatever it takes to reparent her, because parents are toxic. Today we have a really different approach to this, and that approach is actually flipping all that on its head, saying actually parents are probably our most important allies for treatment. And the most, right now, most exciting innovation we have in interventions is called family-focused therapy, which in fact trains the parents to do much of the work. So it's a really interesting time in thinking about what interventions work and what the role of families are. But one thing that seems to be very clear is that blame is not helpful in any way, shape, or form. And that leads to the next myth, which is that we often, if we don't blame the families, we'll blame the victims. So we decide that these are a choice. We spoke to this as well, and that people can just quit if they want and walk away and be fine. And it's really, unfortunately, not the case. Like any other addiction that grabs you, this takes over, and it becomes something that you really have no choice over. It becomes the driver. And the will that you may normally rely on really can't stand up to this until you can find a way to recover. So the blame the victim idea, I think, is not helpful. I always remember Abraham Lincoln, who was no stranger to mental illness, once said that his depression, about melancholia, he said this is a misfortune, not a fault. And I think that's probably a good way to think about eating disorders as well. But that's not to say that this can't be a problem, and that people can begin to take on having this disorder as an identity, and that by itself can become a real barrier to recovery. Finally, let me just say that probably the last myth here is that these are really a destiny, that no one gets better, and it's the fact that some people don't. And that's, by the way, true with pancreatic cancer, and it's true with chronic heart disease. People die of these things. These are serious problems. But we also have to recognize that that treatment for some people really does work, and that some people do recover, and they're able to actually channel the very same temperament, the very same traits that got them into trouble here, into getting over these problems. And when they do that, as you're going to hear in a moment, they do extraordinary things. And they can make the same discipline and that same sense of will and that same feeling that they are not going to be determined by anything except their own very focused drive. They can make amazing things happen when they begin to channel that. My last thought here is that we really do need to all accept a certain humility when thinking about this topic. We've got names for these problems, but the fact is we really don't understand them. We don't know why some people develop an eating disorder and some don't. There's so many people who start dieting and relatively few become addicted to dieting in that sense. We don't know why some recover and others die. We know that, as I've said, blame and shame is not the answer. The answer really here is treatment. And it's the case that getting treatment from someone who's experienced and someone who knows what they're doing is really essential. Compassion, patience, family support, behavioral change are all critical for people to recover. As you'll hear in a moment, this isn't easy. It takes the same strength of will that often drives people into having the problem to begin with. But if you can get people to take on what is really kind of a heroic struggle, fantastic things can happen. And that's why we really pursue with everything we've got to make sure that people do recover. Sort of like in addiction, we don't talk about cure here as much as recovery because we know this is still a threat, but when it happens, recovery is really a remarkable triumph. There are really unbelievable stories that go back now 40 years that many of the great experts in this field are the people who have overcome it themselves personally. You're in a moment about to hear from one of them, my daughter, who I could be more proud of, because even though I was absolutely clueless about what she was going through and not very helpful, she found a way as an adolescent many, many, many years ago to overcome what killed a lot of people around her, and she was able to grow from that. And I don't want to steal any more of her thunder, so I'm going to let her tell you that story. And I guess, Elliot, I'll look to you to introduce her. Thank you.
You just reminded me of something when you said you were clueless. I can't tell you how many times I had that chart for my daughter. Of being clueless and just not being able to understand, which is maybe a little bit funny, but just also speaks to that I don't think anyone who's not actually undergoing the condition can truly understand the nature of it and the power that it has. So I'm very pleased to introduce Laura Gregorio, I'm sorry, who has the courage to speak about her own experience. And she is currently a clinical social worker with a private practice in Rockville. Previously worked for the National Eating Disorders Association, helping to develop standards for eating disorder training, and now serves as the chair of the Washington Society for Eating Disorders. So thank you for coming.
Thanks so much for having me, and thank you to all the sponsoring organizations. I think, one of the things about eating disorders is there's so much shame and there's so much stigma, and people don't speak out enough. And so having these kinds of events, I think, really is one of the steps towards really tackling these disorders, is by really having people speak out and be able to really stop the silence and stop the secrecy around eating disorders. So along those lines, while I am an eating disorder professional, I am going to be sharing my personal story today. Eating disorders are confusing. They're confusing for the person going through it, but they're even more baffling for the people witnessing it. So let me explain simply, for me, why my eating disorder took hold. In one sentence, it was rewarding. My eating disorder gave me self-esteem, control, mastery. I was really insecure. I never felt good at anything. I had no hobbies I really connected with. I felt inept socially, and I never really felt like I fit in. Could never be as cool as the popular kids. But when I was in my eating disorder, those things didn't really matter. My mind was only focused on calories, on planning and minimizing my intake. I would strategize, develop, and perfect techniques for staving off hunger and sustaining myself on the fewest calories possible. And I got good. I got really good. And for a time, I could burn more calories than I took in most days. I was literally living on a deficit. And to me, this meant success. I was finally good at something. And in a society of failed dieting, it seemed that I was able to do something that nobody else could do. And it so consumed my mind that I had no time to worry about making friends or whether people liked me, fears that had plagued me my whole life. So it was a win-win. Now imagine telling someone you have to give this up. You wonder why patients are resistant. If you take away nothing else from today, and you've heard this a few times already, remember that it's not about the food. And it's not really about weight, although that does become the focus. It's so much more complex than that. Eating disorders completely take over. They possess the individual who's affected. They're self-reinforcing, making it seem impossible to escape once it truly sets in. And when you're in it, you don't really want to escape. They impact everyone around them. While it provided me an escape from my negative emotions, from my insecurities, it also robbed me of any connection with myself or with others. I couldn't concentrate to watch a movie. I couldn't sleep without nightmares about food. And I couldn't be free to impulsively go out with a friend or ever truly relax. My mind was always planning, obsessing. And while I felt like I was free, I was far, far from freedom. And the deeper I got in, the more elusive happiness became. When people typically think of eating disorders, they think of super skinny. Most people with eating disorders are not super skinny. In fact, the most common eating disorder is binge eating disorder, as you've heard. My own eating disorder took a very common path. I started out as anorexic, but as I began to recover, the pendulum swung the other way. Eating disorders are the only illness that are truly both a physical and a mental health condition, and that interplay can be really, really complicated. Studies have demonstrated that after periods of starvation, the body and the brain truly fail to be able to regulate intake. And sometimes what happens is kind of almost a hoarding mentality. And so I began hoarding, and I binged a lot. And let me tell you, for me, the binging was a lot worse actually emotionally than anorexia. I was away at my first semester of college, and I would completely empty out sections of the vending machine. I would sneak extra food from the dining hall, and I would eat and I would eat. Sometimes I would sit in a corner scooping peanut butter with my finger out of a tub of peanut butter, just in a complete daze, until I felt so sick that I could barely stand up. And then I would compensate by not eating the entire next day, setting myself up for another need to binge. It was scary and it was really shameful. Whereas the restricting made me feel like I was in control, it made me feel successful, the binging made me feel like a total failure. It was a life-threatening roller coaster, and I couldn't get off. It was the binging that finally sent me voluntarily to a treatment program halfway through my freshman year of college. I was at a normal weight by then, so nobody truly could know what was going on inside. But I was far from okay emotionally or physically. So what did I do? How did I escape that? I'm now 18 years into recovery from my eating disorders. I don't obsess over food. I don't think about my weight. I have 3 kids under the age of 6, and I'm happily married. I have another baby on the way. I have a ton of activities that truly bring me joy and pleasure, and I work professionally in the eating disorder field, both as a therapist and a researcher. So what was the secret to my recovery? And it's different for everyone. And it's hard to say, but I can share a few insights from my experience. First, emotions. My family didn't really do emotions, sorry, Dad. And actually, as we were driving here today, I was telling my dad a story, and he said, you should talk about that. And I wasn't planning to tell this story, but I might tell this story. Yesterday, my 5-year-old son fell off his bike, and we were out on a long walk, and he skinned his knee. It was barely a skinned knee. Like, he squeezed enough so a little bit of blood came out. Really not that much of a skin. And so my husband and I were kind of saying, come on, get up, it's not that bad, you're okay. And he was really upset. He threw a complete temper tantrum, completely melted down. And that night at dinner, and after he had calmed down, he said, don't tell me what to feel, because you don't know how I feel. And I thought, that is the wise. My husband and I just kind of both stopped. You're absolutely right. You're right. It was the wisest thing he possibly could have said. I have no idea where he got that from. But 5 years old, 5 years old. So, I mean, it's easy for parents, I think, to sort of turn off the emotional piece because you've got the job to do. But for me, tolerating, expressing, and experiencing emotions were really hard. And they're hard for a lot of people with eating disorders. I never really learned how to cope or how to just be okay with feeling in general. A big part of my recovery involved, with the help of lots of my therapists, learning how to truly feel and how to recognize emotions in myself and how to cope with them and express them in adaptive and healthy ways, rather than turning to food or the lack thereof to numb myself. And then next, you really can't just rip the eating disorder away. It serves a purpose. It's entrenched for a reason. So you need something to replace it. A new focus, a new drive. And this is where temperament comes in. And you heard my dad talk about this a little bit too. But you might kind of think, you may ask, well, how did I get to that place of complete self-doubt? A place that required an eating disorder to fill some void in myself. How did I get to the point where I was so unhappy with myself that I had so many doubts? And I think it largely is genes. It's the cards that I was dealt. I have a whirlwind of traits that are infamous, you've heard this too, to create a perfect storm for eating disorders. I'm perfectionistic, an overachiever, I'm goal-driven, people-pleasing, competitive, rule-abiding, conflict avoidant, and I have an intense need for control. And these are almost universal traits in eating disordered individuals, especially people with anorexia. And the crazy thing is that this is also what makes eating disordered individuals incredibly successful, wonderful people. Being perfectionistic and goal-oriented can be amazing traits for achievement. And people who are people-pleasers or conflict avoidant tend to be extremely compassionate and nurturing. So when channeled in a healthy direction and used in moderation, these can be really powerful traits, not only in life, but in recovery from an eating disorder. So that's what I learned how to do with the help of a treatment team. Competitive, instead of being the one to eat the least at the table, I'd be the best person in recovery that I knew. People pleasing, I sure would want to show progress to my nutritionist each week. Control, okay, so here's a funny one. To someone with an eating disorder, the eating disorder can make them think that they're in control, that the eating disorder is the only thing in their life that they can control. But the reality is that the eating disorder takes over and the person actually completely loses control. Obsession rules the mind so much that in the height of my eating disorder, I couldn't think about anything else. And as I said earlier, I couldn't even focus to watch a movie because my mind was so consumed with food, calories, and planning the next several days of consumption or lack thereof. So I felt like I had control over something, but really the eating disorder had complete and total control over me. So recovery could become my new focus, my new target, my new sense of control. So I could, and kind of did ultimately, feel really good about my recovery. My self-esteem and my sense of mastery from overcoming a debilitating illness was probably the thing that was most important. And overcoming it was probably the hardest thing I've ever had to do. And it's harder than raising 3 kids under the age of 6, which really says a lot. Finally, a word of warning to the families out there. Eating disorders are sneaky. They come in all shapes and sizes. They affect men, they affect women, they affect kids. I think a lot of treatment centers now are seeing kids as young as 8. They affect all racial and ethnic groups, and they're deadly, as we've heard. They require specialized treatment, and actually a lot of pediatricians and physicians often don't even say the right thing or know what to do when they see an eating disorder. They won't even often recognize it as an eating disorder. So you can't necessarily even trust the physicians. And so they do require specialized eating disorder treatment, and they require, the earlier you can catch it, the earlier intervention, the better the outcome. So some signs to look for in your loved one. And keep in mind that one of the symptoms of an eating disorder is secrecy. So it can be really hard to spot these symptoms. And not all symptoms would fit all people. But a few things to kind of keep an eye out for. Hiding food. Food disappearing or hidden in empty wrappers. Avoiding eating or lying about having already eaten or not feeling hungry. Isolating themselves. Making negative comments about body or weight. Wearing baggy clothes. Suddenly avoiding certain types of food or food groups. Frequent trips to the bathroom. Developing food rituals, like cutting food into little tiny pieces or eating foods in a certain order. Developing rigid rules around exercise. If you see any of these signs in a loved one or you're concerned, I recommend visiting the NEDA website, the National Eating Disorders Association. They have a wealth of information about how to talk to someone if you suspect they might have an eating disorder. I also offer coaching and consulting to parents as well, just to kind of offer personalized guidance. And finally, I feel like I'm very fortunate. So many people don't find recovery. And so I feel very lucky that I was able to overcome this. And because of that, I've devoted much of my life actually to improving treatment for eating disorders and improving access to care for eating disorders. So I hope that today has been helpful, and I think we may still have one more speaker, but I hope today has been helpful in terms of helping you to get a little bit more of a glimpse into what this is like. Believe it or not, this is actually the first time I've shared my story publicly. So thank you so much for listening.
Rabbi Goldwasser, when we spoke on Friday, I don't know if I mentioned to you that there was a marine marathon in town today, so I don't know if you ran into that. But let me introduce Rabbi Goldwasser, straight from the marine marathon. Rabbi Goldwasser is an eating disorder counselor, university professor, and author of several books on mental health, including one specifically on eating disorders entitled A Spiritual Guide to Understanding Eating Disorders. He has spoken and presented on this topic numerous times in in lots of places all over the world. And one point that I'd like to emphasize, which I hope is part of the takeaway today, is that Rabbi Goldwasser has been a leading proponent for many years in the Jewish community in emphasizing the prompt recognition of eating disorders, overcoming the shame, and getting early treatment. So with that, Rabbi Goldwasser.
It's good to be here. My only regret is that I missed my co-panelists, the presentations that were made. I hope that there'll be a video so that I'll be able to get it all in. A number of years ago, I presented a manuscript. The manuscript was of inspirational, true, first-hand stories. I sent it to a major publisher. He sent back an answer within a day. Excellent. There's only one story that is too out there. That story, we cannot do it. It's impossible for us to include. We can't. It's just beyond. I said, okay, which one is it? I was sure it was the one with drugs. And then I thought, no, it's the one where the person had a gambling addiction. They said, you know, the one about anorexia, we can't put that in. I said, oh, all right, I understand. Just please send me back the manuscript. No, we want to print it. We're interested in it. I said, I know, but that's the main story in the whole book. If you won't print it, I understand, I respect you, but just send it back. About 2 hours later, I got a call. They will print it. That was the first encounter I had with a difficulty in acceptance of eating disorders as something that is in this world. It's been around a long time. If you'll check your ancient Tanakh, the Holy Bible, you will see that there are even eating disorders as early as the written Torah, the written Bible began. And so I would like to thank the Orthodox Union and all the sponsoring agencies in this wonderful synagogue and just everybody, because where we've come to today is finally we've arrived. We've stated that there is eating disorders in the world. It is a part of the Jewish community. We are a part of the greater community, and therefore we have to recognize it, give it the proper credence, validate it, and let's learn, observe, and analyze it. Today, I'd like to just begin a little bit. A lot of people have a difficulty with understanding the perplexities of eating disorders. It's an enigmatic illness, as I'm sure you all know. There is not one particular catalyst for an eating disorder. One person may vary greatly from the next individual. One person may not want to grow up. They want to stay young. I had a little girl who was 15, and she insisted only on going to the girls' store where they have the younger ages, 7, 8, or 9, to buy her clothing. She also mimicked sometimes the type of discussion or the language, the mode of language that a younger girl, a little girl, would use instead of someone a little bit more mature. There are others, God forbid, someone suffered of abuse. There are many, many different stressors for it. Not one was asked for by the patient. The person is suffering from an eating disorder is an individual that has an illness. That illness, they didn't ask for. They don't want. If they could get rid of it, in 1 second they would get rid of it. They don't want to. Truthfully, down deep, even though they say, I love anorexia, bulimia, orthorexia, whatever it is, they want to get rid of it. So when we judge an individual, we shouldn't judge anybody. We should know that it is a rahmanus, as we would say. It's a tremendous mercy on them. Look what they're going through. That challenge is greater than we could ever understand. We who don't have an eating disorder. There was a man who came into me. Man is 25 years old. Everybody thinks eating disorder, oh, that's a girl's thing. Yeah, it's only for girls. 18% male anorexia. Today they've coined a new name, manorexia, because men suffer as well. There are images, there are problems in self-esteem that are not particular to the female population. Self-esteem is something that, with the modern day world and all the comparisons in the computer age and how much we've graded everybody and put everyone into a certain slot, that sense of self-esteem is difficult for one to hold on to in this world. Stability, equilibrium is difficult. So this young fellow comes in and the doctor, with permission, called me and told me he just saw stats. This young man is in danger of losing his life. He's on the borderline right now. He has to be impatient, he won't, the parents, whatever it is. So I spoke to him for about an hour, and I said to him, Rod, tell me, you know what the doctor said. I don't even want to say it, but you know what you face. So he says, Rabbi, I don't want to die. But if I have to give up the eating disorder, then I guess I have to die. I cannot tell you how that affected me. We can't understand it because we're here in the world, and sometimes there's answers for everything. We know how to correct everything, we can fix it, we can airbrush, we can Photoshop, and we can do all kinds of things. That's the problem. Because when images come across the world, it is all false. It are all things that play with the imagination. Body images that are unattainable by the normal human being. There are people that have a 6-foot-tall frame and they want to pretend like they're 5'7". There are people that are larger boned and they want to pretend that they're younger, because the media constantly throws these images towards us. Unfortunately, we are a result. We are an unfortunate result of that which we are shown. In the Torah, of course, it says, a person is walking on the street and they see a tree and they say, how beautiful is that tree? So the Mishnah says, that person is obligated with his own life, with her life. The commentaries ask the question, what did the person do so bad about that? He just said it's a beautiful tree. The commentaries say, he shouldn't have said it's a beautiful tree. How strong is the tree? How deep are its roots? Look at the foliage. Instead, the external, the beauty. Believe it or not, you and I, or at least me, we are also guilty of the external. What do we comment? Oh, she's beautiful. Oh, son, he's so handsome. It's unreal. It's an interesting thing that children, ages 7, 8, and 9, in a study done by University of Pennsylvania, children who were told that they looked pretty and handsome, they had self-esteem, and they were successful in their studies. The children who didn't look so nice, according to the world's eye, the children that weren't so pretty, or the boys that weren't so handsome, their self-esteem plummeted. 200 children were interviewed, and they were not as successful in life. So when the Mishnah says, don't look at the external, it's important for us. We are constantly comparing without even knowing. We are constantly making choices even for our own children or the people around us. We have a battleground when it comes to a meal, and how many meals we just finished eating together. An individual that's suffering from an eating disorder, bulimia, told me that before the last holiday, before the last Yom Tov, they were facing a total of 7 meals. I said, I know it's going to be a challenge. There's no, Professor, you don't know the meals that we have in our house. You don't realize, you haven't even begun to understand. We have 7 courses for each meal, and it is a long, long feast. I don't know how you get through it. That's a difficulty. An individual that is there together, and the comments that are made in the meal. This is fattening, that's not fattening, it's okay, it's okay. Yeah, you should have some, it's the most delicious mousse. I didn't tell you to have a whole plateful, just have a little bit, right? Is it? You know, I sat at the table, I hate to tell you, it was a conference on eating disorders in Philadelphia. And you can imagine what the dining room looked like. So they invited me to sit at a table, and there were about 12 people at the table. And there was a father there that was trying to learn awareness of eating disorders and had to understand what his daughter is going through. What's the psyche? What's going on inside of her head? So the father sat next to me, and the daughter was on the other side. And the girl was just eating a little bit. So he said, you know, we're here at the eating disorder seminar. You have to eat today. The son came in also. The son was a little bit, believe me, he was not grossly overweight, a little bit overweight, it's okay, he's a growing boy, right? So he took an extra portion of cake. So the father said to him, let me ask you, are you going anywhere? The son said, no. The father says, so then why are you packing? We have to understand that some of the, what should I tell you, responsibility for the things that go on is in our hands. It is exactly what we think, our mindset. What is healthy eating? Do we go from one to the other? Do we go from snacks and we pile it on to super snacks and all of those that are very high caloric sugar content, things that are grossly unhealthy? And then we say, okay, we're giving you only celery and lettuce to take for your snack. They see both. They see the meals in which a wedding today, or a bar mitzvah, or any type of a happy celebration, it is sheer food orgy. There's no other way to say it. And then you tell the person, be careful, and don't go to the smorgasbord. I guarantee you at the smorgasbord you can eat your heart's delight, you don't need the meal. Then after the meal, which you've had everything in the world, there's a new thing. When you go upstairs to the exit to leave the hall, they give you donuts in a little bag just in case you're still hungry. So then we say to the children, oh no, you have to be careful. First, we should know that there are many things that are happening today that we do have control of. We do have control of the way that we talk to our children. We do have control of the way we compliment our children. Not only, you look gorgeous, wow, you look really nice, whoa, whoa. How about what they do? How about how they feel? How about their characteristics, their midos? How about the things that they do around the house? How about their listening skills? All of these things, I'm afraid, pale in comparison with how we feel about one thing. How do we look? As long as the Princess of England is beautiful, she does not have to worry. Believe me, there's nothing. She'll have every cover in the entire world. As long as the person who is an emes b'al chesed, the person that is loving kindness and benevolent, doesn't look that great, they will not have any covers of any magazines anywhere in the entire world. What we have to know is that it's a fight, and it's a fight that we are all involved in. Every one of us. The Hebrew word which stresses the basis, the staple food in the Bible, of course, is anybody? Bread, lechem. There's a Hebrew verse, lo ala lechem levado yichya adam. A person doesn't live by bread alone. Good, I see Bible scholars here. Bread alone, right? So, and that's how we all live, right? Lechem is a Hebrew word. I take that word, and you can get another word with the same root, with the same shoresh, and that is lochem, fight, milchama, war. And that's what it is. Half the world is trying to lose, half the world is trying to gain, and it's difficult. It's difficult for both sides. Eating disorders are mentioned throughout the Talmud. There is a very involved responsa by the great rabbinic decisor, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, in which he talked about crash dieting maybe 30 years ago, and talked about the permissibility, according to halacha, Jewish law, of crash dieting. Rabbi Feinstein, in his greatness, realized what was going on in the world. And those that undertake diets and see that they can do it, and aren't we good at what we do? Well, they get good at it, and then they go a step further. I don't need to have 2 breads, I could have 1 bread. I don't really need to have that extra little potato, I can do without it. And the person sees how good it is, and then unfortunately it crosses the line, and they can't go back anymore because they fell in. And it's like quicksand. Gets the person more and more. What's it about? Inner needs. What's it about? Anxiety, lack of self-esteem, shame associated with looks, abuse, feelings of powerlessness. A little girl goes to school. What's her choice? Her choice is wear the uniform or wear the uniform. The little girl wants to go as she gets older, and she has different choices where I could go. It's made for her. The high school she's going to go to, it's made for her. The seminary or the college, usually it's made for her. Who she's going to marry depends on the family. Depends on the family. But I will tell you, many times a person does not have a choice. You have to involve children in the choices of life. When they don't have any choice and they can't make their own mind up to do anything, one thing I can assert my independence on, and that is, I won't eat. And you'll have no power over me. And I will be able to fool you and go in my own way and take off the pounds and become skinny like a piece of paper, and you won't be able to stop me. Not that I want to be disrespectful, and many, many young people said, one of the 10 commandments is, anybody, respect, honor your father and your mother, right? I don't do that. I never, ever didn't listen to one thing that my parents said. Whatever they told me, I followed it to the T. And now they ask me, did you throw away your lunch in school that we prepared for you? And I say, of course not. I ate every last morsel. And I lied. Can't judge them. It's beyond. It's beyond them. There are certain things that willpower cannot control. It's beyond willpower. It's a serious illness. It's one of the highest rates of mortality than any psychiatric illness that exists today. Is it given the credence? The DSM just came out a while ago. One of the professors called me into the office and said, let's present a good point. Let's present a good fight. Why it should be accepted. Why there should be insurance money for this kind of an illness. Why it doesn't qualify. But everybody knows about those. I don't want to even qualify it. I don't want to give it any credence by talking about it. But everyone knows the adjustment that you can get with the band today, the stomach. Oh, those are approved. Those, no problem about it. The insurance companies will, with all of the health care plans and all the problems that have existed. A stay in a hospital for a person suffering from anorexia or bulimia. Oh, let's take a look at the stats. Let's see exactly what it is. Refuse, deny, even if the person's ready to die. Yes, but they don't fit the qualifications that we've set forth in the insurance companies. Until we're ready to see it in the entire world, the predominance of eating disorders in every school. I went to the Pacific of Greater Washington. I'm not sure what the proper name of the school is. They invited me. I was there with the 5th graders and the 6th graders. I met with the boys, and afternoon I met with the girls. So it was time to have the meal. So I went with the meal with their teacher, and we sat down. There were about, I'd say, 35 girls. And we were sitting there. One of the girls took out a little box drink. The box drink, I think, was water with something added. It was not, believe me, it wasn't a regular Coke. It was just water with something added. Before she drank it, she held it up. Wait, I'm going to check the panel. I guess I could drink it. On that level, where did they see it from? Where did they hear it from? The number one wish of girls between 11 and 17 is to lose weight. More than half of the 13-year-olds are unhappy with their image. At 18, nearly 3/4 of all female population, girls, are unhappy. Nearly 40% of students between the 4th and the 6th grade have tried dieting. Where did they get that from? 4th and 6th grade, how are they dieting? In the Torah, it doesn't say anything about dieting. In the Torah, it says, "V'nishmartem la'ol l'nafsho sechem," that you've got to take care of your body. It's sacred. It's holy. You have to watch it. You have to be careful in it. Where did they get it from? I don't know. Where could they get it from? Maggie goes on a diet. Little child, and they write a book about going on a diet. And all the kids hear about the diet book all over the place and say, let's get that diet book. Who wants to read about Timothy and the fire dog? So they go and they take Maggie on a diet, and then what do they learn? Oh, I got a new trick. I know how to do it. I'm going to do what Maggie did. Because Maggie was just a dump in the beginning. Look at that. That is horrible. They couldn't have made it worse. They could not have made it worse. And they will learn 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade, exactly all the tricks. What to do, what not to do. I had a young boy that they were watching like a hawk so that he should eat because he was anorexic and he wouldn't eat a morsel, not a morsel. So his parents were smart. They sat him down at the table. He had the inner chair, the father sat in the outer chair, and they were going to sit there and monitor him, just like he'd be in one of those facilities where they watch him all the time, including in the private facilities in the bathroom. And what happened? The child went, did everything beautifully, was sitting there and eating, and goes in the doctor, checks him out, he's losing weight. How could it be? They're watching him. He's under guard. He's in prison right now. He's eating. Oh, they found out. What he did was, very clever boy, he sewed his shirt right here and only wore shirts with big collars. And when they had food, he just put it right out. Put it right out there. Never knew. All the different tricks, believe me, they are adept at. They can learn them online, which is the most horrible thing in the world. There are sites, and I will say internet in general, you have to be very careful. It can bring into the home anything that you do not want with the information highway. But you can learn all the tricks in the Pro-Ana websites. The girls and the boys are much better than we are. If I need something programmed in the computer, I wouldn't fool around and call in a 9-year-old, 10-year-old. He's a whiz, right? And I'm sitting there, what do you do now? They know how to access the information. So what do they learn? They learn all of these tricks. But even without it, there is something inside. There is something inside of an individual with an eating disorder that teaches them exactly what to do and what not to do. I visited a young girl, 17, 16 years old, in Gateshead, England. Gateshead, England, I guarantee you, has no internet. I mean, within the Jewish community there. I guarantee you, there is no exposure to magazines, to Star Magazine in U.S. and all the Hello from England and all those things. There's nothing like that. They don't see anything. No newspapers. Maybe the newspaper with the Torah portion of the week they get, but that's about it, right? All of a sudden, I sit down and I see that she knows every trick in the book, every secret. I said, who you been talking to? I figured by telephone. Oh no, we're very careful on the long distance. I said, well, you have a friend? No, I figured it out. It is a need inside. Where there is a need, a person is going to create a way. They're going to learn how to do it. And we're going to have to understand that a lot of things are because the individual cannot see. They cannot see what they're actually doing. One more little stat. Young girls are more afraid of becoming fat than nuclear war or cancer. Low and where does it come from? We have to understand there is a comorbidity that exists. Where there's an eating disorder, usually there's going to be something else. Where there's an eating disorder, there's going to be other situations that go on in an individual. That has to be dealt with. It's not about eating. When people come into my office, very rarely do we talk about eating. As a doctor, tell you, it's not about the food. It is about the perception. It's about how a person sees things. It's about body dysmorphic. It's the individual that takes a look in the mirror, like if you ever went to the circus and maybe you're thin, and you look in the mirror, and then you look like this, oh my God, what happened, right? That's how the person that has body dysmorphia looks at themselves. They could be thin. There was a girl that came in, and I'm not even sure. It looked like bone with skin attached. Came in with her mother. And I said, what's your goal? She says, my goal would be if I could just drop 10. Drop 10, I'd be fine. Drop 10 where? From what? How? Naturally, I didn't ask her. Where does it come from? There is something that we don't understand. It is a disorder. And that's the way the individual sees themselves. Reward and punishment. Reward and punishment. We won't go into the whole, we won't go into the entire situation on it. Reward and punishment we always respond to, right? Most of us, right? We win something, we get whatever it is, $10, $100, we're happy. If we lose something and we get $10, $100 taken away, we're sad, we're upset. In the mind of the individual that has anorexia, that has an eating disorder, it's not simple. Because there is no consequence. You're going to displease, you're going to make somebody upset. It really doesn't matter, because it doesn't exist. That area of the brain that operates in that way is not functional to its fullest at the time when a person is in the throes of an eating disorder. So you say, oh, don't you see what you're doing to daddy? And look what you're doing to mommy. She's got to take you all day from doctor to therapist to nutritionist. And you want to make the person feel bad. And they can't. They don't. Because it's impossible right now. You've got to let them get together. You have to let them come to themselves, or it's a problem. Every individual has to know that there's something called splitting. Good or bad. Naturally, a mother or father or a sister or brother or a friend or a relative has to do sometimes things that are acceptable, politically correct, and sometimes we have to do things that are not so acceptable. You weren't good, I have to tell you, and I have to explain it to you. Maybe the person doesn't want to accept it, but you have to. It's your job, it's your responsibility. Splitting means the child says, this is my good mother, that's my bad mother. I hate my bad mother. My good mother's okay, I love my good mother. But you know, I realize the only reason she's good to me is because she has to be, it's her responsibility. That means that people, very often, if they don't give the right answer, could be devalued in the eyes of someone with an eating disorder. Because that also, the individual loses their cognizance of what's truly good and truly not good. It's a very important part of understanding the whole idea of what is going on inside the brain. Interesting, in the Talmud, there's a tractate dealing with idol worship, Avodah Zarah, and that says that the eye has a lot to do with the heart. The eye has a lot to do with the heart. And it's very interesting, because Tosfos, one of the great commentaries, one of the earlier commentaries says, what a person sees with their eyes is dependent on their heart. In particular, this is talking about on the Sabbath, taking medication for an eye problem because it may affect in some way the heart. So you say, what are you talking about? Eyesight, I understand how it goes, the pupils, the cornea, I know what happens. I've seen the pictures, I know how it images like a camera. What do you tell me that has anything to do with the heart? You know what the Talmud is saying? It has everything to do with the heart. How you feel about yourself, how you perceive yourself, how you perceive others. That is how you're going to feel about yourself. If you don't, and your heart is down, and someone tells you you're beautiful, you say, no, I'm not. I promise you, you could be the most stunning individual in the entire world. And someone will come and say, oh, you look lovely. But I don't. I had a girl, 19 years old, a young woman, 19 years old, brilliant poet, brilliant painter on her own. She would bring into me beautiful portfolio, full of the most outstanding, incredible pictures. Some were dark, some were gothic, some were scary, but she's got to paint what she feels. It was amazing, and she knew I enjoyed it. She brought it in every time, new ones. She expressed herself. One time she said, as we were talking about getting in touch with the inner feelings, she said, I have to tell you the truth. when I began to paint, and then I would finish it, and someone would come in and say, oh, that's unreal, what a painting. I would say, I didn't do it. Yeah, but there was no one else in the room. She said that she had difficulty understanding that she did it, that she was a part of it. She couldn't believe that she made it. She meant, okay, it was a mistake, something happened, by luck, it will never happen again in a million years. Brilliant, talented, smart, with it, every chance in the world, except for one thing. Her heart governed over her eyes. And when the heart will feel, the eyes will see. So we have to know that when an individual takes a look in the mirror, it is probably one of the biggest enemies that there are. The scale. Oh, there was a mother that told me she did a great thing. She wants to make sure that all of her daughters never have a problem with anorexia or bulimia or anything else like that that you're talking about. I said, oh, great, what'd you do? Well, I got a scale in the house, and all of the children have to stand on the scale Friday morning. Friday morning. They all come up and line up and stand there and scale. I said, oh, it's digital, or I just make conversation? Oh, no. We got a hospital scale. The one where you sit and you measure and exact. I want to have an exact. I said, well, it's wonderful, so how's it working? I got to listen. How's it working? I don't know. My oldest daughter, all of a sudden I see, isn't eating so much. And she's on the thin side. And my youngest son, who never ever used to eat potatoes and snacks and certain items that he wouldn't eat, now I see that he's eating gross amounts of them. So I said, well, what does that tell you about your scale in measuring? She said, I'm not sure. I guess it'll take a little bit longer and then they'll all get into line. Clueless, out to lunch, whoa. Individual has to start to understand where we're at. This is the world. You talk about scales, you talk about points, you talk about correct numbers. Let's talk about BMI. Let's talk about body mass, the correct thing. Take a look at a height weight chart. Take a look at it. See what's normal. See what's not normal. Get it. You can even discuss it. Take a look at the food pyramid. See what we're eliminating. See what we're not having. Take a look at our own tables. What are we serving? What are we giving? What are we espousing? The words that come out of our mouth are so important. So important. Our own encouragement to our children will help them to become the greatest that they are. They all have tremendous potential. But if they feel it's based on looks, and they're all beautiful. The Talmud says every one of them is beautiful. We are all beautiful in our own way. But if it's only the outside, ask anybody that would like to go to Hollywood. You got vacation, intercession, go to Hollywood, interview 100 stars or starlets. Ask them how happy they are. Ask them what they do just to go onto the set one time. Ask them how many people come and work on them, every part of their face and their body. Ask them what happens when they put a photo in the journal. Ask them how much it's airbrushed. Ask them how much it's Photoshop. Ask them what they do. And then we'll understand what is truthfully happening in this world. I have 2 hours left, but I know they'll never let me do this, so just to finish up, we have a great responsibility ourselves, and I did not get a chance to discuss the many, many questions of Jewish law that are involved, that come to me from all over the world. This past Yom Kippur, the fast, I counted, I don't usually count, but I did count, I had 165 calls, emails, or texts about fasting on Yom Kippur. Usually what I'll have to do is have a battle royale with the individual, me the rabbi saying, don't fast on Yom Kippur, and them saying, Rabbi, I want to be holy, what are you telling me, what's going on? And the truth is, the law is that a person should not fast on Yom Kippur. And in fact, I developed a special prayer for those that need to eat on Yom Kippur, so that they will understand the true Torah philosophy and outlook, and that they will be able to eat with an inner peace that they are doing the right thing. A man one time is about 22 or 23. When I told him he's got to eat, he's severe anorexia, I told him you've got to eat on Yom Kippur, and he says, Rabbi, I tell you the truth, I mess up the whole year. I mess up on a lot. I won't tell you what he messed up on, but he messed up on a lot of the laws and the observances. So at least let me do Yom Kippur right. I don't want to mess that up too. What can you say? Many different questions have come in. We did not get into self-harm. I know it's a little bit squeamish, but it is akin. Many patients with bulimia also cross over to self-harm. It is huge today. It is also very well hidden. A person can eat and be healthy on the outside, and they could be doing something to themselves. I don't even want to talk about it, but it's interesting because there is somebody from a location not far from here that wrote me. They wanted to see what the Jewish idea on self-harm is. So they went to a bookstore, and when they indexed self-mutilation, it had one paragraph: when girls get multiple earrings. Isn't that smart? The woman went out, and she said, I can't relate to this. What we have to understand is that it does exist in the community. I was interviewed by the New York Times, and the New York Times said to me, is it true that in the Jewish community there is a higher rate of anorexia, bulimia, and went through all of the various types of eating disorders? And I said, no. She says, then how do you account for it? I said, because we're usually an insular community. Being insular, we're able to keep some of the things on the outside. We don't let it seep in. But in this area, we equal at least what's happening in the outside community is. We have to give it attention from the youngest grades, from the earliest on, children, give them encouragement, give them good choices, bring them in on the various things that we do in life, help them to understand that their worth is not skin deep. Their worth is inside. Their worth is the soul. Their worth is their character, their good nature, their good heart. Build them up, give them self-esteem. Because we are a nation today that is sorely lacking in self-esteem and self-respect. Just to conclude, I came into Toronto. I was flown in by a family that had wished to see me and consult. They have a son that was in a facility for 3.5 months. Time limit, deadline, he had to go home. They would not see him anymore, even though he was desperately in need of it. I wrote a book a little while ago, Starving Souls. It's available from Kitab, if anybody would like it. So they bought it in desperation. They were looking for any answer on how to treat him at home. And the first thing it says is, don't try to treat your own children. It's an impossibility. So they called up, who's this Goldwasser guy? And we had a conversation. And they called me a few times, and I tried to help them out with whatever information I could. I put them in touch with a local doctor where they're up in Canada. Then they called me and they said, listen, it's the situation right now. What would it take for you to come to Canada? I said, if I could, I would come for you. We arranged it. I went there. I spent an entire day with this patient, this young man. We sat in this study. I don't even think we went out for maybe 2 minutes and came back in the entire day. It was the evening time. My flight was back, and I believe about 8:30 at night. It was the evening. It was time for him to eat. So I said, okay. He left the study. I stayed there. He went in the kitchen. His father came in and said, the individual has requested you to join him while he eats. I said, I'm not so sure that he wants me to be there. I said, could you go and ask him again? Just tell him if he's just trying to be respectful, I don't have to come. He went in. The son said, no, I would like to have him. I came inside. There was a counter. He sat on one side, I sat on the other side. He had the food in front of him. He picked up his spoon. He took a little morsel, a small little morsel. It was not bigger than your fingernail. He was there, looked at me, looked at the morsel. He was having such a struggle to put it in his mouth, I cannot tell you. There were a tense few minutes. All of a sudden, his head broke out in sweat, beads of perspiration. He ate the morsel. The car came to pick me up and take me back to the airport. And I thought about one thing. In the Bible, we all know in the Torah it says, by the sweat of your brow, you will eat bread. I would like to give a new interpretation to that verse, to that pasuk. And if the Torah didn't mean it then, it means it now. Thank you very much.
So we're going to take this opportunity to start with our questions and answers. We're going to ask our speakers to join us up here. Obviously, when Rabbi Goldwasser comes, we will stop and we will continue later. So I'm going to, if anyone has questions, if you could give the cards to Hannah. So the first question is, I guess either one of you can answer it. What is the connection between eating disorders and depression?
Well, I think that they often are comorbid, so they often go hand in hand. And a lot of the treatment requires treating both of them. So you have to treat the underlying depression. As we've talked about, the eating disorder isn't necessarily about the food, it's often about the emotions. And I think some of the emotions that are involved in depression can lead into eating disorders being the coping that people use when they don't have more effective coping skills. They can turn to the eating disorder to deal with some of the emotions connected to the depression. So a lot of times treatments do involve treating the depression, sometimes with medication that's underlying the eating disorder. But they don't always go together. They often do not all of them.
Great answer.
Okay, great answer. Okay, next question. How do you deal with a 20-year-old daughter who claims she is not hungry, has already eaten several nights, and has already eaten several nights a week? Does that make sense here?
So you want us to use the microphone? Sure. Why don't you just stand?
We can take turns on that.
Okay, sure. Was the question clear?
No.
Perhaps we should go to
So I'm not totally sure I understand the question, but it sounds like how do you deal with a daughter who you might be concerned about? If she's doing some, saying she's not hungry or avoiding eating. At that point, I think it's important to express some concern. And again, you don't want to necessarily talk about weight. You don't want to necessarily talk about food. But you can certainly say that you're concerned. You want to avoid kind of the judgmental tone. You want to have a very supportive tone, and express some concern and see if that your daughter's interested in getting some support or some help from an expert that they can talk to very privately and confidentially. It's important to kind of keep an eye on that for sure. And again, non-judgmental. You want to be on their side on this. And try not to stick with the eating behaviors, but if there are other behaviors that you can see that you can kind of pinpoint, notice that she's been more anxious lately or more irritable, and you could ask what that's about. Try to avoid talking necessarily about weight or food.
What if someone is in denial about the disorder? So I'm not sure if that's the parent or the child. But can you address that?
We can both take a shot at it.
Okay.
That's a really good question. It's part of a mix. treating mental disorders so much more difficult than heart disease or cancer or many other areas is that we often deal with people who don't think they're sick. And we wonder then why, even when we have treatments that work, it's so hard to move the public health numbers that we don't actually see the impact of those treatments in populations. And this is why many people are in denial or just don't really want to get treatment. So it comes really in two flavors. On one side of this, you can have denial, which is implicit in many of the illnesses. So when you're depressed, you feel hopeless, helpless, worthless, and you don't deserve to feel better. So you're not going to do whatever needs to be done in order to get the care you need. And that's a form, I don't know if you call it denial, but it certainly feeds into the problem with recovery. The second form is something that you see more often here, and that is, and Laura I think spoke to this, is that there's something that can be enormously rewarding in the very symptoms that you have that are killing you. And it's hard for people to understand that. It's part of what makes this disorder so pernicious as you get this into this vicious cycle. And so the denial part is to say, don't take this away from me. This is who I am. This is not an illness any longer. This is me. And don't change me because this is the only me that I know and will accept. How do you deal with that? I don't think there's a perfect answer. Most often, frankly, we don't deal with it because there's not an opportunity. People isolate. They don't come for treatment. They don't get involved for the very reason that they have this issue. When there is an opportunity, challenging the denial only gets you so far. And what seems to be far better, the way that Laura talked about, is to engage people at a different level. What I often had done as a clinician is to say, I get the fact that you believe X, but you know, in the way we talk about this, I suspect that there's a part of you that believes Y. And let's talk about that dialectic. Let's see what that internal dialogue is all about. And what part of you isn't seeing this as your identity, but seeing this as a problem? And how is this a problem for you? And is there some way that we can help on that score? But Laura, you probably have more recent experience, so your thoughts?
Yeah, I would kind of agree along the lines of trying to challenge the resistance is going to meet you with more resistance and probably heighten their resistance. And so you kind of want to find a place to join. You want to find a place to find where they are unhappy. Is there something else in their lives that's difficult right now? Are they not spending too much time with friends? Are they isolating themselves? Are they, find something else that you can really join them on and side with them on, because the eating disorder is not just about that. There's going to be so many other ways that it has permeated their lives in negative ways. So find one of the negative ways that is affecting them, because they may really like it in a lot of ways, but they probably have a little bit of ambivalence. So find that ambivalence and find out where that other side is so that you can find that place to join with them. There's actually a whole technique called motivational interviewing. And so if you want to look that up as well, there's kind of tips on how to do that. And family-based therapy is all kind of based on the idea of training parents how to do this motivational interviewing and finding the place to join with their kids so that they're not pushing against the resistance, which is going to cause it to be stronger, but finding a way to sort of another in to sort of be on the same side. So yeah.
So this question is, can you talk about cutting and self-harm and eating disorders? I guess how the two connect. Let's keep going.
Yeah, there's often a lot of overlap between self-injury and eating disorders. They both serve as maladaptive coping mechanisms. So when somebody doesn't have healthier, more adaptive ways to deal with feelings that they have difficulty tolerating, they're going to use these other ways to sort of diffuse that emotion, whether that's through using food or the lack thereof, or some kind of cutting or self-injury to release the emotion. And so they often do go hand in hand. It's all about emotional regulation. And someone who is doing those often needs some kind of treatment that's going to involve helping them to cope with emotions. Anyone?
Okay, this one is to Dr. Ansel. Are there any drugs currently being developed or in RCT specifically for eating disorders versus other situations?
I wish there was a drug that either was in development or was on the market that actually could be a reliable help here. As often happens, we have these very complex problems, and it'd be great to have a magic bullet. We thought we had one a few years ago. There's an antipsychotic drug, Zyprexa, that has as its side effect very intense increase in appetite. And the biggest problem, the biggest side effect for this drug and drugs like it is weight gain. Thought, aha, how perfect is that? It doesn't seem to work that well. Or if it does work, people stop taking it, which tells you the problem that we have here. That is that even if you had an agent that could deal with the symptoms, it doesn't deal with the part of this that is your identity, is the reinforcer, is that sense of this is working for me in some ways. So it requires, unfortunately, much more than a pill. And that's not to say there isn't still interest in developing medicines that might be helpful, and people are engaged in that in very minimal ways because I don't think they know exactly yet what the right target would be to go after. But there's lots of conversation about that. I think our third guest has just arrived, so maybe what we'll do is retake our seats and then we can move on.
If there are any other additional questions, please. So from before, well, one person submitted a question which really is not appropriate for this venue, and I'm going to suggest it's about an elderly person who's bedridden. I'm going to suggest if the person would like to get in touch with me at the OU at 212-613-8188, I'll be happy to try to get you the information that you need to work on that situation, but it's really not for this venue. Okay, so the other two that I have so far, aside from epidemiology, what are the areas of current research?
One of the major research questions is really how should we be categorizing or diagnosing this set of problems. A lesson that we've gotten from the rest of medicine, it's a whole new movement in medicine called precision medicine, is that symptoms alone are probably not great indicators of how we classify whether it's heart disease or cancer, that we need deeper kinds of information, biology, social factors, a range of other things. And that's going to happen here as well. So one very active area of research is to figure out ways to actually identify who has what are the different subtypes, and which of those subtypes will do best with which kinds of treatments that we have to offer. So that's a very active area. The other place, and I guess it's worth mentioning here so that people understand this, is that over the last many years, there's been frustration with how it's difficult to get the findings of research implemented in practice. And we often talk about hypertension as the example where discovery took 17 years to actually get implemented in a consistent way. The new way of thinking about this is actually to turn that whole equation around to say, how do we bring practice into research? How do we make sure that everyone who has a loved one affected becomes part of a national campaign to find a solution? That we collect information from everybody and we crowdsource these issues to try to come up with new approaches and we learn instead of having just 1,000 anecdotes. Those thousands of cases become data points that actually help to teach us what is going to be best going forward. So We have a program now for common data elements so that it will get first researchers and then practitioners to collect the same kinds of information, and then creating the databases that will essentially get everyone who is struggling with this involved in trying to find the solutions.
So there's also some private research that's going on through organizations like GFED, which is a global fund for eating disorders, as well as the NIDA Feeding Hope Fund that is funding some research to disseminate evidence-based practices for eating disorders as well. Sometimes one of the problems is that there are not that many people that are trained in practicing the treatments that are known to be most effective, and so being able to disseminate that treatment to areas where there's not as much treatment available. There's also some research being done looking at what's the difference between people who recover and people who don't, and trying to look at what's going on there, what might be some of the mediating factors.
Okay. Where is it mentioned in the Torah about eating disorders?
You want to answer that one?
There are numerous places where we learn about eating disorders, and it's interesting because it starts from the very beginning. The first parasha, the first Torah portion. What happened? Adam and Eve, Adam and Chava. And there is a tree. And that's the only tree that they're not allowed to eat from. But what happens? They got to eat from that tree. That was an eating disorder. When an individual says only that or only that, and they begin to restrict or select, that is the idea that a person cannot judge with their own mind, because there are various factors that will sway them, influence them whether to eat or not to eat. I'm hungry, but I don't eat. I shouldn't eat it, but I'm going to eat. If you want to take a look in the Talmud, Vespasian was asked concerning allowing a doctor for the great Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who had suffered because he fasted many days. He fasted for a religious reason, but still in all, in order to get back to good health, he had to consult with a medical professional. There are many things we'll learn about in, if you take a look in Nach, you will see somebody who was elderly who stopped eating. Somebody who we would say has an eating disorder. Now the individual was approximately 85 years old. If you'll know today that we have generational eating disorders that could be a grandmother, a daughter, and a granddaughter, and they're all eating disordered. So we see that there are many different examples. The Rambam in Mishnah Torah Maimonides cites in the laws of, where he cites the different laws of health, about what is healthy eating, what is not healthy eating, what a person should eat, what to put on the plate. There are many, in fact there is a book today that has made a diet just based upon Maimonides' writings, and they came to me for an approbation for that particular book. We also read in the halacha, in the Jewish law, about what is considered to be a meal. As you know, when it talks about saying the grace after meals, so there we have Yochalta, anybody? V'sarata. Let's go, don't make me do all the word. V'rachta. That you eat and you're satisfied, and then you bless. What does it mean to be satisfied? I need 4 plates. What are you talking about? Or is it a half a plate? And that is a point that is discussed within the responsa. That's just one small idea. An individual that says during the 9 days, a time when maybe meat is restricted, I have to have it. I'm an isthmus. I'm delicate in nature. An individual that has a severe need to eat, maybe an individual that's pregnant, she could get along without it, but she says, I need to have it. The doctor says, I'm not sure she needs to have it. She says, I need to have it. The Talmud says, she gets it. So,
What is the role?
So really the best approach for treating eating disorders is a treatment team approach. So you want to be able to actually have, ideally there should be a therapist, there should be a nutritionist or a dietitian, a physician who can be kind of monitoring things like electrolyte levels and things like that. And then also, in some cases, a psychiatrist as well. So you really do want to have a full team approach when dealing with eating disorders. That's really the ideal scenario. And each of the people on that team play a very different role, a very essential role. And so the nutritionist in that role is going to be doing a lot of sort of education around what's appropriate and what's not. Somebody who's very much in an eating disorder mindset completely loses the ability to know what is appropriate and what a normal meal is, or a normal serving size. They completely lose that ability. That's something a newborn knows, to eat and stop eating when they're full, and eat when they're hungry. A newborn knows how to do that, but somebody with an eating disorder has absolutely no idea. They might not know when they're hungry, and they certainly don't know when they're full. And so they actually do need somebody to teach them the basics of how to eat again and what's appropriate. And so a nutritionist will walk them through that, sometimes put them on a meal plan of these are the things that you eat, until it retrains the brain. Literally, the neural pathways absolutely have to reform to know when the brain's going to tell the stomach to stop eating and it's full. But you actually have to be put on a guide to sort of train that to happen again. So a nutritionist will really be responsible for doing that. Counseling through a therapist would be working more around sort of the emotional process that goes along with that, and helping somebody to deal with some of the things we talked about earlier, like tolerating emotions, expressing, experiencing emotions, coping skills, those kinds of things.
There's a question about saying a few words about the prevalence of eating disorders by types within the Jewish community. It doesn't say what types are. I guess various demographics.
There was a study of the types that this disorder affects. The truth is that it cuts across all the lines, all demarcations, cultural backgrounds, religious background, socioeconomic background. It really doesn't matter. People that have certain situations, conditions that affect them in life are more prone, they're more positioned to come down with an eating disorder. Definitely in my own research, I've found that people with eating disorders are among those that are highly intelligent, upper percentile of their class, exhibit a tremendous amount of talents in various areas. They are people that many would say, I think this girl or this boy would be the last one to come down with an eating disorder. The first thing a parent will say, they are perfect, perfect, perfect. You know how we talk, perfect. And then all of a sudden this happened, and it's imperfection. And we can understand. The problem might be the perfectionism that they stress in the home. But you will not find that the particular problematic people, it can happen to anyone. Anyone sitting in this room could have an eating disorder or could catch one, for lack of a better word. That's the mindset that we have to have. It affects all of us in various ways, maybe on a small level, maybe on a greater level.
Okay. Are there any measures that could be taken to prevent eating disorders? If so, what are they? What measures can be taken to prevent them? And while our panelists are thinking about it, I'll just mention to you that the wonderful resource tables we have in the front have many, many handouts from NIDA on various strategies of awareness and lots of materials that I recommend that everybody take every single one of them.
Usually when we talk about prevention, it comes in sort of two flavors. There's the sort of public health approach. What can we do for everybody in the society that changes norms and standards that will have an impact? And then the second flavor is sometimes called indicated prevention. What do you do for someone who's at very, very high risk or maybe in the earliest stages? So I'll take the second piece, and maybe Laura, you can comment on the first one. As somebody becomes ill or begins to develop on this trajectory, it's just it's a fundamental law here that the earlier you can intervene, often the better the outcomes. That's true for heart disease, it's true for eating disorders. We want to be able to detect this at a very early stage. So what happens often here is that you become involved way late in the game. It certainly happened to us. We kind of just didn't even see what was going on until, fortunately, our very perceptive daughter said, "I've got a problem," to which we said, "Come on, you can deal with it, it's not a problem. You're like a great student, what's the problem?" So you have to actually think through how to make sure that as people are developing this, and this goes on over months and years, that you're not waiting until the final stages before somebody actually gets the kind of help they need. On the public health side, what do we do? And the Rabbi already spoke about this to some extent. What do we do to change images and expectations? Nita's had some role in this. Laura, you've been involved. Maybe you could say something about that.
Yeah, well, Nita has done a lot in terms of trying to improve media images, and so there's some things that are happening on a larger scale in terms of sort of the environmental factors, and certainly there's a role that you can play in your own home in terms of the way that you talk about weight and body, or not talk about them, and talk about things like, beautiful treat, or talking about very strong treat, the things that we've heard. I think those are really important things on the prevention end of things. I think there's some other things in terms of just serving as a healthy role model at home of some of the other factors that we know play a role in terms of emotional dysregulation and coping mechanisms and things like that, to be able to talk about emotions openly at home, so that you're not having your son come to me like mine did and say, I'm allowed to feel what I feel. Yes, absolutely. But to be able to really, I was saying to someone earlier, to even, role model, you're having a hard day, you're feeling sad today, you're going to go take a bubble bath, and being able to say that to your kids, to show them that you have healthy coping skills. You sometimes feel upset, you sometimes feel mad, and this is how I'm going to do what I'm going to do with it. Or brainstorm as a family. What are some of the things we can do when we're feeling really upset? To come up with sort of a list of coping skills. Kids sometimes just don't know what to do with their feelings. And if they don't have any good options, they're going to come up with options, and they might not be the best options. So to be able to have that discussion and have that be an open discussion around really let's talk about healthy things to do when you're having a bad day, or when something upsetting has happened, and to be able to have that be something that you role model as well, and to be able to show those feelings and show how you deal with them. Kids learn from that; they pick up on that really quickly. The other thing is around. I forgot the other thing I was going to say. Well, I'll pass it on and then I'll remember.
I think it's important that we're very much in touch with the children, with our family, with our relatives, and we understand what they're going through. If they're having a difficult time and the little child is bringing home papers where they're failing tests, so you say, you got to do better. It's not acceptable. You have to do your homework. What do you think? You're fooling around all night. You should know that there could be something else going on. And the fact that the child gets the disapproval at home, disapproval at school, is not able to meet the mark, it could be that the child has a mental block in that area. Einstein was chastised because he didn't speak. Dumb child, couldn't speak, right? Maimonides, they termed him, you cannot educate this man. Maimonides, the one that wrote his magnum opus while he was in flight, running into exile down to Egypt. That's when he wrote it, without any reference books, without the library, without the internet. So I think that we have to be very much aware of what is going on in the children's lives. We have to observe them, we have to be in touch with them. A little time, free time to sit and talk. Take them out for an ice cream, take them out for whatever. Spend a little time with them. Find out what's going on. They will reveal it if they feel that they can, if there's an open channel of communication. Too many people said, I didn't realize it was going on for a year. I didn't realize that she was always wearing big sweaters now when she came down. She was always cold. And I did notice that her hair was a little bit thinner, but that happens when you get older, right? How old is she? A teenager. So people we see it every day. We have to be sensitive. We have to understand what we're seeing. We have to maybe involve someone else. We shouldn't be the therapist. We should go to the doctor. We should go to a therapist. We should go to another individual that they may have an easier time of speaking to. And that is a very important thing, because between parent and child, there's a lot of stuff that goes on. Don't forget, you had the tribes, the 12 tribes. They couldn't tell their father Jacob that they got a problem with Joseph. They couldn't say it. They couldn't say it. They could have said, listen, we've got sibling rivalry, which is possibly a catalyst for an eating disorder if there's a comparison between two. I don't have scientific studies, only my own research on it so far. But they had a problem, right? So they should just sit down, Jacob, let's make a round table. Jacob, you have a little drink here, I got the microphone. We have a problem with Joseph. Instead of that, they take him, they want to kill him, right? They take off that coat of many colors. They dip it into blood. They sell him into slavery. They thought the guy was killed, right? Years and years later, they meet up with him. Oh no, he's still around. How could it be, right? Why didn't they just go and tell? Why did they have to do that? Why didn't they just tell their father they got a problem? We are not necessarily the therapists of our own children and loved ones. They need to talk. And sometimes it's difficult. They got to feel it's confidential. They got to feel that they're not going to be judged. They got to feel that they can say everything. So be open to having someone else besides ourselves talk. And it is halakhic. It is under Jewish law. We go for help. We recognize things that don't go well in this world. It's all part of it. It's part of the religion. A lot of individuals think you can't do that. It's not religious to do that. You can't go here, you can't go there. The doctor has to be, not true. The doctor needs to be an expert. The doctor needs to know his stuff. And the child needs to get to the doctor.
One more thing I just want to add to that I know what I was going to say, which is that you want to arm yourself, educate yourself as well, and be skeptical. Your kid's going to say they don't have a problem. And in fact, the doctor's probably going to say there's not a problem. I can't tell you the number of clients that have come into my office because it started with something the doctor said. Doctors are so focused right now on anti-obesity stuff. And so they often make very inappropriate weight comments. So it happens a lot. I mean, my doctor missed it. I went to the doctor when I was in the very early stages of my eating disorder. I was having dizzy spells, my hair was falling out. My doctor said, oh, that's probably normal. So, and we hear this all the time. Doctors all the time miss it. Or they may say something really inappropriate. So you have to be skeptical. And if you sense something's up, something's probably up.
I just have to add to that. It's extremely important to find the right individual. I was in Belgium, and I went to see a patient there. And I told the patient, as a way of encouragement, that I had just celebrated, together with a community of a woman that suffered from anorexia for years. She just donated a kidney. And they had the donor and the recipient celebrating at one of the large restaurants in New York, and they asked me to say a few words. The psychologist was there, who specializes in eating disorders, and he listened. It was a sort of a group session, and he said, oh, donating a kidney is one way to lose weight.
Okay, the final two questions I'm actually going to combine. One is a little bit of a comment, a question, and then you'll see in a minute why I'm combining the two. The first one is, the comment is, we often hear comments
about weight, saying, I'm so fat, you look so good, have you lost weight? How can we deal with those and refocus on midot, on values? No obituary facts talks about how much somebody weighed or that they were a size 0. Okay, so that's a comment. So we're talking about refocusing. But the last question, I think, is something that is on the minds of many, many people in the Orthodox community, which is talking about eating disorders in the context of the shut-off crisis. The shut-off crisis is the dating crisis, dating for marriage, which is the only way that people in the Orthodox community date. So that's something, Rabbi, you would like to address that?
It's interesting because a great deal of thanks goes to the Orthodox Union. They are unbelievable. They are unreal. They're not afraid to confront the issues of today, which are most important in this world. They had contacted me, I believe it was 2 years ago, about this thing of matrimonial matches and eating disorders. And they had a whole day program in Manhattan in which I was to discuss in one of the large sessions this area. I developed a PowerPoint presentation. I had 20 young women and 10 young men privately discussing their ideas about shidduchim, matrimonial matches, and eating disorders. And you would not believe what they said. We had the whole session on tape. They gave me full permission to use it. We didn't use anyone's, of course, name or face. And unfortunately, there is some tie-in. We have to stress from a young age to the boys and to the girls that the girl does not have to be thinner than, I don't know, whatever the thinnest imagination, the thinnest model is in the world. We have to stress to the girls, you need to present yourself in a way that is lovely. You need to have a good presentation to take care of yourself physically, but build yourself up emotionally, have your talents, develop scholastically, whatever we can do to make the person a good individual, a whole individual that feels good about themselves. Shidduchim, when an individual is asked to describe themselves, most girls will ask me a question. They have asked to provide a picture with a resume. Should I provide a picture or not? And you know what I would say? No. However, if they don't provide a picture, we're afraid that they won't be accepted. A picture doesn't tell us a lot. Could have been a bad day, could have been a good day. The way the person looked in the picture might have been up. Maybe they're not photogenic. Maybe the camera was bad. Whatever it is, let the individual see each other. Let's see what kind of chemistry there is. You'd be surprised. Don't you walk down the street sometime and you see the husband or wife that he married her. She took him. I can't believe it. Or she What's that all about? There's more to it than looks. But when we are going to lower it to the lowest common denominator and base it on looks and tell, oh, my daughter would go out with someone that looks like him. How do you know? How do you know? Did you make the decision for your daughter? Are you going to get the perfect, what's his name? He just got married. He just had a chasana.
George Clooney.
George Clooney. Right? So you're going to marry George Clooney. And George Clooney, I'm saying he's a good man, whatever. George Clooney that has a very low IQ and is not a great Baal Chesed and really doesn't care about another person and is not marriage material, but he looks good, he's good. That has to go out. It has to be rejected from our thinking, from our outlook. It is not a concept that any person that wishes to be observant or religious should ascribe to. It is totally the opposite of how we should feel and what we should train our children to think and inculcate them with the right ideas and the right principles for a good and healthy life.
We have one last question. What do you answer a child who says she's so fat?
That's a tough question because I think it depends on a lot of things in terms of your relationship with the kid as well as the child's temperament and the child's other situational factors. There's some really great books out there on talking to kids about weight. There's one, depending on the age, there's one called Shakespeare that recently came out. There's a couple of others. So if you Google them, there's some really great books on talking about that. So I would recommend looking it up because it's kind of a personalized thing depending on your situation and your kid. But do you have any thoughts?
The question is what to if they...
The child, him or herself, is saying, "Mommy, I'm still fat." You know.
I would say that I also feel fat sometimes. I would validate their statement and say, but you're a beautiful child. You have all the charm and all the chen. Don't forget two words in Hebrew. Yofi is pretty. Chen is charm. A lot of times it's the charm that is more important than the yofi, the prettiness. Prettiness comes in and out, goes and comes at different times in life, but the chay remains for 120 years. I would tell the child their value, that you love them, you accept them, be just the way that you are. You're adorable. I love you. I don't want you any different. I want you to be like you are. Put a picture of that child, blow it up, the best picture you could have. Put it on the mantle and show how proud you are of the picture. If we will give the children that idea, even they come and they say they're fat, they're going to say they're fat today. And they may even come home and say that my friend said that I am fat. And then what are you going to do? Because their friend, of course, mitami da yosem mikulam. When a friend says something, it means much more than when we say something. But we have to be extremely careful about that. The reason is because when people begin to think that they are fat, even at the youngest age, children, and they begin to taunt children and bully children. So you have a public school girl that was taunted. They went over the internet on her, and unfortunately, a beautiful young girl was found dead.
Just one more thing. The other thing is I think it's really great if the kids feel comfortable talking to you about that. So I think you want to also validate them for coming to you. You want to encourage them to be able to come to talk to you about those kinds of things. And empathize with them. I don't think you necessarily need to correct that feeling. I don't think you need to tell them that they're not. I think it's okay to just say, I understand that you feel that way. Tell me about it. And allow them. I think there are a lot of associations that get made. We do as a society make certain associations with what fat means and what thin means. And those aren't necessarily true associations. But to be able to have a conversation about that and what does that mean to them. Because it might not necessarily mean anything that has any reality basis, and they may know that on one level. And there's some big space there to be able to have a good conversation around that.
On behalf of the Orthodox Union, I want to thank each of you for your participation in today's program. I am sure that you will agree that the information you have received today is extremely valuable and absolutely life-saving. We truly appreciate the time and effort of our speakers, Elliot Schaller, Dr. Inzel, Lara Gregorio, and Rabbi Goldwasser, who have given us tremendous signs of awareness and strategies for fighting this disease. The wonderful Achdus unity of this beautiful community is obvious with the many sponsoring organizations that have come together for today's program. I think you have them on the various sheets you have. It's absolutely amazing to see that everybody should come together for such a program. We are especially grateful to Beth Shalom Congregation, Rabbi Antin, and the board and membership for their gracious hospitality today. I'd like to take a moment to share with you a small glimpse of the work of the Orthodox Union, and we appreciate all the nice comments we've been hearing from all of our speakers. Many of you, of course, know the Orthodox Union as the OU, the kosher supervising organization of over 500,000 food products that are manufactured in 83 countries. The OU is much more than food. The OU is well known for its publications, including Jewish Action, the magazine that you'll see on our OU table outside, OU Advocacy, which lobbies in many areas, and of course they're very strong in Washington, D.C., to protect Jewish interests here and of course in Israel. They're very active right now. One of the major things that OU Advocacy is working on is tuition rebates for yeshiva parents and also for various resources for special needs families. Yachad is our special needs organization, which has chapters in many cities and provides numerous services for families. Of course, I'm sure you all know about NCSY for Jewish teenagers, which is well represented in this area by the Atlantic Seaboard region. We appreciate today that some NCSYers came and helped us with registration. The Washington chapter has had major growth in the past few years, and in this past summer, 25 teens, many of whom were from public schools, went to the various NCSY summer programs. The community offers Jewish student union clubs with public schools in the greater Washington area. We want to just recommend to you that NCSY is a wonderful, wonderful, healthy outlet for Jewish teenagers. And if you're not familiar with what is available in this area, you can go to the website ncsy.org. Also, on our tables outside, we have leaflets for the upcoming summer programs. And we recommend that healthy outlets are a very good way for Jewish teens to avoid a lot of problems. Am I correct? We also have the OU Job Board, which is global in offering job opportunities throughout the country. They also have many resources, such as helping people with their resumes and other programs that you can get to from the OU's website. Our department, Community Engagement, is the Department of Synagogue and Community Services, which has been very proud to provide this morning's program. We want to thank, of course, Hannah Farkas, who deserves tremendous accolades for all of her work to doing it, for getting this all done, and of course Adina Schwartzbaum, our administrative assistant in the back, for her work here as well. Our department works hard with synagogue and communities throughout the country to address issues, strengthen and grow the community, provide leadership training, and share best practices. Please call us to work with your shul. We want to thank you for joining us this morning and hope that the information you have received will help you to help others in your schools, communities, synagogues, and your families. Thank you so much. Have a safe trip back.